Blood Debt by Sean Michael O'Brien. Part 1. Romance. Chapter 1. Mackenzie. University of New Hampshire, Durham campus, Tuesday, 9 May, 11 a.m. Mackenzie Boru. History. Sponsor, Mike Harding. At the sound of his name over the loudspeaker, Mac climbed up the last step and mounted the stage. I look like an idiot in this get-up, he thought. Why on earth did I let myself get talked into this? The tall, lithe man crossed the stage, and Professor Harding adorned him with the hood signifying his new academic rank. Mac turned and shook hands with the president of the university, who looked about as thrilled as the recent grad to be up on the stage. The unseasonable heat felt like a special preview of hell under the anachronistic regalia tradition demanded for the occasion. To the president's credit, he mustered a smile as he passed a ribbon-tied scroll to Mac and shook his hand. "Congratulations, Doctor," the elderly man said as he shook Mac's hand. "Thank you, sir," Mac replied before immediately taking another step and shaking the hand of a man he didn't recognize. Who is this guy, Mac wondered. Beyond the president, just on the other side of the gentleman reading the graduates' names, were three additional members of the officiating party. Mac recognized one as the guest speaker, but he had already forgotten his name, why he was supposed to be important, or what he had said. The gent hadn't been a very engaging orator, and Mac had mostly dozed through his remarks. Mac paused at the stage exit and looked out at the audience. He recognized some of his former fellow students, but he hadn't invited any guests and didn't know anyone else in attendance. He tugged on the hood, more of a stole, he thought, where it rested against his throat. It was early in the list of graduates, who were announced in order of class ranking, so the audience hadn't yet tired of shouting support to every overeducated fool awarded a diploma. Mac gave a quick wave back at the hooters and quickly stepped down from the stage. He knew he was supposed to resume his seat and wait for the event to end. He was expected to toss his cap into the air with great gusto, too. But he hadn't wanted to attend this idiocy in the first place, so he toyed with the idea of just leaving. After all, it wasn't like he couldn't go to the row of clerks waiting in administration to hand him his real diploma right now. What the hell, he decided. I'm already here, and I've been through worse. Mind made up, Mac worked his way back to his assigned place and took his seat. Graduation was important to many of his fellow students, and he liked some of them. A little. As the tedious ceremony wore on, Mac gazed around the portion of the campus visible from where he sat. The university consisted of a set of beautiful brick buildings, some dating back to the late 1800s. The newly minted doctor of history had genuinely enjoyed his time here, appreciating it more after every trip away. Mac's academic career had suffered occasional interruptions due to contract work, but he had applied himself diligently when present. That effort had paid off, as he had earned first an M.A. and now a Ph.D. The question now, of course, was what exactly to do with it. He doubted very much that he would fit in at many universities, assuming he could even find a position among the nation's somewhat leftist history departments. Furthermore, academia was very much a publish-or-perish environment, and writing academic papers, while easy enough for the new graduate, tended to be a bit boring, even when he had some personal interest in the research. So what the hell do I do with myself? Mac was well aware that many of his fellow graduates were asking themselves the same thing, and had been, with increasing panic, for months. Many had applied for postdoc work, and a few had even found positions. Mac had floated his resume to a couple places out west, but his heart wasn't set on them. The new doctor's bank balance was healthy enough, and would be even more so once his house sold. So he wasn't in immediate need of a paycheck. Still, he really needed to find something to do. 2 hours later, in desperate need of both a restroom and a cup of strong coffee, Mac was questioning his decision to stay. After the announcer called the last person being awarded a bachelor's degree, the student body president called for the tossing of the caps. Mac did his duty and quickly started edging away. And as he made his way to the nearby row of porta potties, he wondered if he was glad he'd stayed after all. Not really, he decided. Not at all, in fact. Mac! Mackenzie Boru! Cried a disturbingly high-pitched voice. Mac grimaced and then let his face slide back into its normally neutral position before turning toward the unpleasant summons. "Hello, Kim," he greeted the young woman solemnly. Kim grabbed him in an unexpectedly enthusiastic hug. Sniffing against the unwelcome embrace, Mac patted her softly between the shoulder blades. "I'm pretty sure I've killed a couple of people for less," he thought grimly. He was a bit bemused by the woman's warmth, considering her general attitude toward him over the last several years. "Giddy with the joy of the day, I suppose," he decided. "Can you believe it? We made it!" his colleague shouted excitedly. "What parties are you going to?" "I'm not much of a partier, Kim," he replied. "No, you've always been kind of standoffish," she agreed tartly. "Ah, there's the Kim I know and dislike," Mac thought. "You suppose that's why we never hooked up?" the younger woman asked. "Or maybe because you despise men like me," Mac suggested with the ghost of a smile. Kim Daniels had gone on more than one rant over the years about how knuckle-draggers in the military and their resistance to social progress. Kim gave him a look that started out surprised but quickly turned hostile. "That's because—" "Goodbye, Kim," Mac interrupted. "You take care of yourself." Mac turned his back on his former classmate and strode away. I really am glad to be seeing that last of her, he thought, forestalling himself from revisiting her many faults. Just shy of 45 years old, Mac was a very fit man on the cusp of middle age. His face belied his years, and his hair had only just begun to show some gray over the ears. He kept that hair barely long enough to part on the top of it, near shaved on the sides. It was easy for folks in his sleepy New England college town to recognize that Mac was a former soldier. Women often found his stern demeanor and sharp features appealing, but none of them were ever interested in sticking around all that long. His last girlfriend had broken up with him while presenting a litany of complaints about the characteristics she had found so attractive before. Complaints that had culminated with a very acerbic observation that Mac had probably never loosened up in his whole damn disciplined life. Mac was sure she had gotten that line from a movie. As a lifelong practitioner of one-liners, Mac knew that most of the good ones were invented in Hollywood. He would have hated the writers for beating him to those zingers, but he recognized it was petty jealousy on his part. Mac knew he could never be that creative. When it came right down to it, while he was a bright enough guy, the scholar had maintained a near 4.0 throughout his college career, he just wasn't that imaginative. The scholar was a man who had strived to maintain an honest appraisal of himself, both his abilities and his shortcomings. Mac walked across campus to the administration building and joined what turned out to be a reasonably short line. After a mere 5 minutes, Mac was walking back out, diploma in hand. Mackenzie Boru's residence, Durham, New Hampshire, 4 p.m. 3 hours later, Mackenzie was sitting on his front porch, puffing on a freshly packed bowl of Dunhill and enjoying a stiff Jack and Coke. He absent-mindedly reached down to pet his dog and... Damn it, he frowned. He'd forgotten. Again. Mac really missed that dog. Boy, the Chow Boxer mix. Had been a good buddy. I should get a new dog, he told himself. Again. He'd been telling himself that for the last 2 months. Have to wait until I settle down somewhere, he reminded himself. The man was done with New England winters. When he had first moved to New Hampshire 6 years earlier, the then newly retired soldier had figured that the cold couldn't be that bad, not in comparison to the Hindu Kush or other places. Experience had proven that belief to be grossly mistaken. Mackenzie Boru was sick to death of the winters that seemed to last 10 months at a time. He wanted to go somewhere warm. In fact, he'd given serious thought to moving back to Texas, though he hadn't been to the state of his birth in, better than 30 years now. The avid diver had also considered relocating to Florida. Beautiful beaches, great diving, lots of young women with top bodies and bikinis. Plus, he'd reminded himself, there was a large Cuban population, and the retired soldier had friends in that community. However, entirely too many of those friends would be after him to come off the bench and get involved in some wild-ass Cuban incursion or other. Things down there hadn't much improved since Castro's unlamented death, and Mac really was ready to retire. The occasional bit of contract work he'd done for the government since leaving active duty had been personally lucrative, sure, but he'd earned his doctorate for a reason.
The veteran was ready to hang up his spurs for good. In the end, Mac's mind turned more and more to the idea of moving way out west. He'd always really liked Las Vegas, after all. Sure, he wasn't much of a gambler, nor had he been into the club scene even before he'd gotten old enough to qualify as a genuine lounge lizard, but Vegas was a town where something was always going on. And the hookers were first-rate, too, should he decide he wanted something uncomplicated. After his last all-too-brief and all-too-disastrous relationship, Mac was willing to settle for an occasional bout of negotiated affection. Anyway, Vegas it would be. The new graduate had contacted a moving company already, and American movers would be coming by on Monday to pack him up. He had chosen them because, for a fee, they would hold his shipment for up to 90 days, after which the storage fee went up sharply. Before the movers came, Mac would need to sort out what he wanted to keep with him: clothes, a couple of guns, his laptop. He'd been contemplating various routes across the country, plotting out what sights he wanted to see. The world's biggest ball of twine is a must, he decided. Taking that route, Mount Rushmore and Devil's Tower would be doable. The buzz of his cell phone interrupted Mac's thoughts. Glancing at his iPhone, he smiled in recognition and hit accept. "Ski," he granted the caller. "Hi, Mac," a cheery voice answered. "How was your graduation?" "Meh," Mac replied. "I shouldn't have bothered." "Well, you expected that," Ian Koslowski said. "Are your plans firmed up? Are you still thinking Florida?" "Actually," drawled Mac, "I've decided to head out your way. I'm Vegas-bound, old buddy." "Really?" exclaimed the voice on the phone. "Isn't that awful close to this Sodom on the Pacific?" teased Ian. The West Coaster was very aware of Mac's disdain for California. "Yeah, but I like Vegas," answered Mac. "Besides, I figure we can get together once in a while, head down to Mexico for an occasional dive trip." Ian and Mac had first met on a dive boat almost immediately after Mac's retirement. The two veterans had quickly struck up a well-lubricated companionship, trolling the local bars and cans by evening and diving the Great Barrier Reef during the day. "Outstanding! When do you figure you'll wash up out here?" "A couple of weeks, give or take." "Huh," mused Ian. "What?" Mac asked, a little suspiciously. "Well," replied Ian, "as it happens, I'm being dragged to a weekend retreat in about 3 weeks. Mac could hear the quotes in Ian's voice. "I figured I'd be bored to tears the whole time, but if you're free to come with, they have a decent trap range. We could get in a few hours of skeet each day." Both men were average shooters. "What kind of weekend retreat?" Mac asked. "I think my girlfriend has dragged me to," Ian responded. "It's a social justice to-do. Some of the Hollywood crowd getting together to solve their latest bugaboo in between spa treatments." "Yeah, I see the appeal there. What did your latest love interest promise you to get her to take her there?" "A gentleman doesn't discuss much matters, Captain, sir," the LA lawyer played with mock indignation. "Anyway, if you're game, I can get you an extra ticket. On me." "On you, eh? This wouldn't by any chance involve yet another attempt to get me to come work for your boss, would it?" Ian's employer, a habitual resident on the Forbes 500, had instructed Ian to hire Mac several years before. The offers had grown increasingly hefty. Last time around, Ian had tried to tempt him with a VP position in the security section at a rate of nearly $500,000 per annum. But Mac had turned them down every time. He really wasn't interested in getting into harness for anyone outside the government, no matter how profitable the job might be, especially when the corporate headquarters were in California. Mac had a cordial contempt for the West Coast state. "Not this time, pal," Ian assured him. "Straight shooting. I'm looking for someone sane to hang out with." The older veteran considered the younger's offer for a moment. "Sure, what the hell," Mac replied. "I don't want to rush the drive, and I won't be setting out until next Tuesday or Wednesday, but I should be able to make it." "Great," Ian said. "Let me know when you get out here. We can either link up there in L.A., or I can send you the directions, and you can meet us there. And FYI," he added, "some of these starlets will be unattached, so—" Yeah, let's focus on the pigeons we shoot at," answered Mac with a grin. "I'll be in touch in a couple of weeks." "All right, brother. Take care." "You too, Ski," replied Mac. With that, he ended the call. The retired soldier got up and made himself another drink. As the afternoon faded into evening, his mind drifted back over the years to his youth. "Mariella," he thought. Huh. Been a while since I thought of you, girl. Mackenzie Boru had never been accused of being an overly sentimental man, and he had lost her a long time ago. In the early days, his mind had dwelt on her often, but as the years had passed and he had grown colder, the loss of her had hardened him, especially after how she had been ripped from him. Shaking it off, he put her back in the box he kept in the dark recesses of his soul and went back inside. He still had packing to do. Durham, New Hampshire, Wednesday, 10 May, 7 a.m. Mackenzie Boru sleepily gazed at his reflection in the bathroom mirror as he whipped his shaving soap. "Feeling your age today, old son," he thought. As he lathered his face, cold gray eyes looked back at him from the bathroom mirror. Mac was in pretty good shape for someone who'd spent the years he had in the places he had, but the mirror reflected some of the scars he'd accumulated along the way. Drawing the straight razor down his cheek, he carefully stretched the skin around the 3 scars that marred that right cheek. Faded, the souvenirs ran in parallel lines, a reminder of a close call many years before. Finishing the first pass, Mac gave the razor a dozen fresh strops before lathering and shaving his mug again, shifting the direction of the blade to get a close shave. Afterward, the retired soldier gave the blade an even 50 draws against the leather strop before putting his toiletries away. A short shower later, the man was toweling himself dry. Within another 15 minutes, he was dressed and packing his gear, loading a military-issue cot last. Mackenzie's doorbell alerted him to the arrival of the last visitor he would ever have in his Durham home. Mac trotted down the hall and opened the door to reveal Alice Bingham, the real estate agent he had commissioned to sell the house. "Hi, Alice," he grunted, the pleasant-faced, slightly plump woman at the door. "Hiya, Mac," she responded airily. "All set to hit the road? And I guess I should have said good morning, doctor," she amended with a smile. Mac smiled back warmly. He had liked Alice since they first met. Nearly 6 years prior, she had been the agent who'd found the Georgian-style house for the newly arrived graduate student. And Mackenzie Boru had absolutely loved his home. A bit of a handyman, he'd spent many a weekend fiddling with various bits of it. As the house had been built in the early 1900s, it had character in its bones. "It's always Mac to you, gorgeous," he answered. "Why, Mac, you flirt," the septuagenarian rewarded him with a girlish giggle. "I'm going to miss you, son. There just aren't enough men like you around anymore." Alice had lost her only son in one of America's savage wars of peace. Her boy had been a Marine in Vietnam, killed when Mac himself had barely been a toddler running around the wrong side of the tracks in Dallas. Her fondness for veterans from all services had endeared her to Mac early on. They chatted amiably for a few minutes longer while Mac loaded his battered old Ford pickup. Finally, Mac handed Alice the keys to the house. "You send me a letter when you get settled." "You send me a letter when you get settled, Mac. You hear me?" she commanded. Mac grinned. "Sure thing, beautiful," he promised. He gave her a brief embrace and took one last look at his house. "It's a great old house, Alice," he said. "I've done right by the old girl." The house's previous owners had painted it yellow a few years before Mac bought it, and he had faithfully maintained the exterior each summer. Warm light spilled to his south-facing study, in which he had spent many an hour reading and writing various papers. The house was a little large for a single man, but he'd always appreciated the space. Barracks living as an enlisted man had broken him of any desire for roommates or close quarters. The scholar gave the house one last lingering look. "Goodbye, old girl." "I'll get you a good price, Mac," promised the real estate agent. "You drive carefully now." "Yes, ma'am," Mac assured her. The former student climbed into his truck, gave Alice one last grin and a brief wave, and started out for the southbound Route 108.